Greetings.
Greetings, how you doing?
I have with me today Chief Foday Ajamu Mansaray, and this is Kenya Mansaray. I'll be interviewing him. So, one of the first questions I have for you is, what is Gullah Geechee?
It seems to be the question of the century.
Yeah.
I can only give you the definition of Gullah Geechee that I've been able to come up with as a Gullah Geechee, living my life knowing of being a Gullah Geechee since a child. Not always knowing exactly what it meant. When I was young, I thought it was just a language, a way that my mother would act when she got upset, a way that her and her siblings would embrace each other with happiness. But it was actually more than that. And I remember I had a cousin, elder cousin, he's like my mother's age. And I mean, he was straight talking Creole. He was just blah, 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 blah. And you had to live in the family to understand what Uncle Bunk was talking about. You really had to live in the family to understand. And so just that early exposure to that, I thought that Geechee was just like a language. I didn't understand that it was our food. It was the way that we prayed. It was our spirituality. It was our understanding of what family is and is not. Our tendency to always include extended family members right on in with the blood relatives. We're very fast to extend family. I didn't know that these things were characteristics that could be traced back to Gullah Geechee culture and heritage. But to me, Gullah Geechee is a Pan-African community.
Pan-African community.
Yes, I say Pan-African. I say Pan-African because right now, in this world, if you brought African people from, let's say, 50 different ethnicities, and you put them, man and woman, on a plantation in America with 100 enslaved Africans there, 2 to each ethnicity, you would have a Pan-African community even if that community is dominated and currently enslaved. So I think that the African diaspora in general is a Pan-African community in that sense. So when I say Pan-African community, I mean that in terms of the genetics. As Baba Ajamu always says, there's a genetic Pan-Africanism as well. Something happened in the West that didn't happen on the continent in terms of lineages and being intertwined. People losing their culture while at the same time creating new culture. You understand? And so being snatched away from family, but then also finding yourself in America making new family. Among other people that got the situation that you have, but they may not necessarily come from the same place you come from. So Gullah Geechee definitely is an identity that is birthed out of a Pan-African experience, something that happened to so many different Africans that it wasn't our identity can't be isolated to one country or one region or one ethnicity of Africans who were formerly enslaved. In fact, there was a whole conglomeration of ethnicities and regions. I know that the Congo greatly contributed to the Gullah Geechee gene pool, as well as the cultural heritage dynamic. You go down deep into our spirituality, man, you find a lot of Congolese similarities. And then also you have, Ghanaian elements there as well. You have people who were formerly enslaved in Jamaica. You had the Caribbean passage as well. You had the Middle Passage, of course. You had the passage coming from Africa directly to the United States, but you also had the Caribbean passage. There was people who was first enslaved, took into America and enslaved, that ended up down in the Caribbean somewhere, and vice versa. So there was always an exchange going on between the Caribbeans and the United States, particularly centered around Charleston, South Carolina, both ways. Charleston was founded in 1670 by British colonizers who who were formerly located in Barbados, and they chose to go to the coastline of South Carolina and begin to create the settlement of Charleston. And of course, they had enslaved Africans with them, and that would be, in most people's narrative, the origins of the Gullah Geechee community. Now, some would go farther back. Some will go back to 1526, whereas the first people who ever, European people who ever attempted to establish a settlement in the current United States of America was Spaniards.
Okay.
And they were looking for opportunity, looking for places where they could exploit, where they could establish settlements, for trade or whatever they said they were doing, but they were seeking to conquer. And so, legend has it that the Gullah natives who lived down in the Georgia and South Carolina area, as well as the Africans who they had enslaved that they brought with them, worked together, something like they did later on during the Seminole Wars, where you have groups now like the Yamasee, which represent a fusion of the formerly enslaved Africans and the indigenous elements. There was fusion, particularly a lot in that region. There was fusions, there was intermarriages and multiplication, within lineages. And so back then, the indigenous decided that we're not going to take this crap. These people can't stay here.
And this was where location
This was in South Carolina.
Okay.
Yes, this was in South Carolina. The first attempt by Europeans to settle a permanent settlement was destroyed. It was destroyed by the Africans who were enslaved by the Europeans who brought them there. They rose up in rebellion, and the indigenous people who decided that they did not like these people and wanted them to go, also backed up the rebelling Africans and ultimately chased the Europeans away. And legend has it that those Africans stayed and were incorporated and assimilated into the indigenous group. And so
That changes the narrative.
it changes the narrative because we're talking about 400 years in 1619 into 2019. But they overlook the fact that if we're talking about not when the British first legally enslaved our ancestors, because they won the imperialist struggle and became the ones to hold the United States of America today. But you have to look back and say, well, what was the first European attempt to settle, colonize, and enslave in North America? When? Did it happen? Was it Jamestown? It wasn't Jamestown. It wasn't Jamestown, y'all. We have to dig deeper. And it was almost even 100 years before that, almost a century before that. In fact, 5 years from now would be 500 years since that was going down. And we're counting 400 years. So it just means that our enemy has been controlling our narrative and leaving out very important parts of it. So when you talk about the origins of Gullah Geechees, man, it's so many origins. That's why we say many roots. One Fambo.
Yes.
Fambo meaning family.
Yes.
We have a very family concept about ourselves. When you say what are Gullah Geechee people, it's not like we're a race of people. We're Africans. We belong to the black race. In fact, we make it, we distinguish ourselves even from the European and have a general principle that a Booker can't be no Geechee. So therefore, Gullah Geechee started as and always has been a black African identity for our people in the diaspora. And so when you think about that there, and you understand that our ancestors had their own group their own culture, their own way of cooking and healing each other and getting married and mending family. We had our own way. And so when you understand that, that's what Gullah Geechee is, essentially. It is the attempt by our ancestors and by us now to preserve that which we inherited as a consequence of what happened to us. We look at it not as a defeat, but as a victory. We've been able to retain more Africanisms in our traditional culture than any other group of distinguished groups of identifiable Africans in the United States of America. And we're 45 million strong right now. On top of that, places like Charleston and places like Sullivan Island, which was, it was a pest house. And they said up to almost 70% of the Africans who entered the United States of America directly from Africa.
Say that again. Directly
up to
from?
70% of the Africans who entered the United States during the height of the transatlantic slave trade, the 18th century, 1700s. Up to 70% entered the United States of America through the port of Charleston. And before they were allowed to embark and be brought to the mainland, they had to be quarantined, and they had to be prepared. They had to be fed a lot of rice. They had to look good on the auction block, They had to rub their skins with oil and grease, make them look as black as possible. See,
put them in the sun. Yeah.
One thing you gotta understand about Charleston is that Charleston, them bookers, they had a particular taste. They knew what kind of Africans they wanted. They had like a menu. They could say, "Ooh, I need this kind of African for that. I need this kind of African for this." And so they had engaged in what I call imperialist white supremacist anthropology from the very beginning of the encounter with us, that allowed them to begin to distinguish us based on cultural characteristics and physical traits. And so, for instance, I am a Mandingo descendant. I'm a descendant of Mandinka people, the people who are famous all around the world for having created the once Mali Empire. When you hear Soundata Keita and Mansa Musa and things like that, Timbuktu, my ancestors were taken from that group of people.
How do you know that?
I know that because my ancestors passed it down to their descendants. Okay. And on top of that, I know that because I'm home and I'm part and parcel of the Mandingo people here in Sierra Leone and West Africa.
Yes.
And so not only is it a claim, but it's actually a recognized thing.
Yeah.
And it's great. It's wonderful. It's a great feeling to know that. My mother was able to tell me, my ancestors said they was Mandingos. As I sit before you, I have a very diverse cultural background in terms of my ethnicity, ethnic background. My mother, of course, if you ask her, she a Gullah Geechee. But at the same time, she'll tell you that her father was a Jamaican and her grandfather was a Haitian. And so that's true. Absolutely true. My grandfather actually was a bishop in the church from Montego Bay, Jamaica. And I don't know much about my Haitian great-grandfather, but he definitely was Haitian. And so just the fact that I come from a lineage of people who preserved oral traditions that included ethnicity was that really gave me an African-centered consciousness at a younger age where, as black as I am, I couldn't deny being African. It was what it was. I just had to learn how to, relate to it. How to understand Africa, because obviously I was an